What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Christ in Capital, the show that wants to encourage you to love God, love neighbor, and build something. I'm back again with Nathan Johnson. Nathan, what's up?
Hey, how are you doing?
I am very good. I'm excited about this episode. It's going to be a quick episode. For the listeners, we're going to do these Nathan and I are going to start doing these like regular, quick hits on current events and stuff like that. So I'm excited. What are we talking about today, Nathan?
So there's been some crazy things in the news recently, which is kind of redundant because it seems like everything in the news recently has been crazy. But
yeah, news and crazy. That's about they're like synonyms, I think.
kind of goes together. Yeah, but so this week we have had two examples of guillotines being used as symbols of I don't know exactly what they would say they're symbols of, justice, frustration. But the first guillotine was put outside Jeff Bezos's house after his net worth hit $200 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And there was quite an outcry from certain people at how unjust his amount of wealth is, particularly because he doesn't pay his employees what they think is fair.
Yeah.
Now, of course, they said that what they think is fair is that he pay each employee at least $30 an hour,
Mm-hmm.
which seemed a little bit exorbitant. I am a college professor, and I don't even get paid $30 an hour. But
yeah.
But that was so they put a guillotine outside of his house, which when I read that article, I was pretty taken aback and shocked until another article came out that on the last night of the Republican National Convention, not only did protesters bring out a guillotine near the White House, but they actually had an effigy, a full effigy of Donald Trump that was underneath the guillotine.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So we kind of dug up those articles, and I think the first one was I don't remember if this article was like pointing back to an event that happened in June, because I know that a similar thing happened in June where they went to Jeff Bezos' house and put a guillotine up, but I don't know if they were. I don't remember. I should have paid more attention to the article, but basically I know they did that in June, and I don't know if this article was just kind of rehashing anger about his like newfound wealth and pointing back to that as something that was like an ongoing thing. But what I thought was interesting was the fact that it was at his DC home. I think it's kind of symbolic about, a lot of these big business guys, these corporate CEOs, they have, a lot of influence in government. And they can have a lot of like influence and say in government decisions and things like that. But I think the one thing that I wanted to talk with you about was the whole guillotine aspect. Anytime someone like mentions like guillotines, or you draw up the imagery of guillotines, for some reason I have this like this reminder or this like image about the French Revolution come into mind, and I don't know why that is, actually, because I don't really know that much about the French Revolution, but for some reason in my mind that's kind of what it goes to. And I wanted to see what's your take on that. What, in a nutshell, what was the French Revolution? Does it have any similarities to what's going on now with kind of cultural sentiment around big business guys, wealthy guys, or powerful people, and our disdain towards them? What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. I think the guillotine is a proper symbol to draw parallelisms between the French Revolution and what's happening today. In a nutshell, so the French Revolution happened pretty soon after the American Revolution. In a lot of ways, it was inspired by the American Revolution. So the French people had a monarch, and they actually had a string of monarchs who were pretty indulgent, oppressive. And then there was a whole ruling class that were wealthy and were kind of gaining their wealth off the backs of exploited workers. And then you had a whole clergy class who kind of supported the wealthy and didn't really take care of the poor. So at the beginning of the French Revolution, you had these sentiments of wealth disparity, discrimination, and general frustration at how unequal things were. And
Okay.
so the tagline that came out was equality and liberty and fraternity. Okay, so that's kind of what they said that they were after. And so kind of motivated by those three values and this kind of Enlightenment claim that the individual is free and that the government derives its powers from the just consent of the governed, they wanted to start their own revolution similar to the American Revolution. But the problem was, unlike the American Revolution, that had clearly laid out exactly what it wanted to build in place of the English monarchy. The French Revolution descended fairly quickly into chaos because it was more of a tear down sort of revolution than a build up sort of revolution.
Okay.
Now, that's not to say that they didn't have documents that were kind of outlining the ideology of liberty, but those documents weren't followed very well. And instead, what quickly happened within a couple of years of the revolution starting is what was known as the Reign of Terror. And this is where the guillotine comes in. So the Reign of Terror was begun by a couple people, but probably the most famous one is Robespierre. You probably heard that name, Robespierre. And I just want to read you a quote from Robespierre that is chilling.
Okay.
So essentially what was happening was not everybody was getting on board with the French Revolution. Go figure. And that was very frustrating. So these same people who were maintaining these values of equality and liberty and fraternity were also saying that in order to get there, you have to get the people out of the way who are disagreeing with you. So this is what he says. If the basis of popular government in peacetime is virtue, the basis of popular government during a revolution is both virtue and terror. Virtue, without which terror is baneful. Terror, without which virtue is powerless. Okay, note this. So virtue is powerless without terror. Terror is nothing more than speedy, severe, and inflexible justice. It is thus an emanation of virtue. It is less a principle in itself than a consequence of the general principle of democracy applied to the most pressing needs of the homeland.
Did he just... Okay. Terror and democracy are... Did he just make them synonymous?
Yes, that he says that terror is an emanation of virtue. So it comes from virtue, and it is a principle of democracy. Because here's the thing, and we've talked about this before in the program, but if you've got radical sentiments of equality, particularly, say, economic equality, the only way a lot of those sentiments are going to work and be applied wholesale in the country is if everybody gets on board. But then what happens when some people don't get on board? Well, you have to force them to get on board in the name of virtue.
Yeah.
And so for Robespierre and others, in the name of virtue, they would behead people on the guillotine. And actually, I mean, tens of thousands of people died during the Reign of Terror. It lasted about a year, and it was an incredibly bloody episode in the French Revolution. It just got worse and worse.
Was it for like just like nobility, or like, I can't imagine there's like tens of thousands of nobility, or is it also for,
Right. So this is where it gets nefarious. So initially, they beheaded Marie Antoinette and the ruling class, and they would then drag nobles to the guillotine and behead them. But then this is where I see a lot of similarities with what's going on now, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement, which is that if you, during the Reign of Terror, questioned the tactics, questioned the means by which they were going about creating equality and fraternity, then you were seen to be against the revolution. So even if you were for the revolution, you just criticized some of the tactics, such as beheading people. You got beheaded. And so this is why tens of thousands of people started dying. And it got so bad that Initially, they had these tribunals who would hold a trial, and then you were either pronounced guilty or innocent. But it became there were so many people accused that the tribunals had to just quickly decide who they thought was innocent, who they thought was guilty, and there was no measurement of punishments. So it was either you're beheaded or you're innocent.
Wow, that
Nothing
sounds
in
like
between.
that sounds like social media.
Right. Yeah.
That's crazy. Like, I mean, the echoes of that we hear that today. Like it's like there's these for lack of a better term, spirits that govern the philosophies and the ideologies of history. And I don't mean spirits as in like the ghostly kind of. I mean, it just mean like this spirit of the age kind of thing.
Right.
It's just it's so like I don't know. How do you? So, do you have? I mean, you don't think we're gonna go that far, do you? I mean, obviously we have guillotines set up in the street right now. I mean, that's pretty far, but I don't know. Do you
Yeah,
have?
I think.
Do you have
I
any
mean,
hope?
obviously, I don't think that in a year or two we're going to be beheading people in the street.
Right.
But I think those symbols do mean something, and I think they're indicative of the general spirit, as you were saying, which is very similar to the spirit of the French Revolution. And it's this idea that we have this concept of justice and equality. Okay, fair enough. But then once you establish that as the virtues of your movement, then anything you do is justified. And so we see cities burning, buildings being torn down, people being accosted in the streets, some people dying, all in the name of equality, all in the name of justice. And then whenever somebody on social media, particularly a prominent person, calls into question the tactics, they get canceled.
Yeah.
Now, they don't get beheaded, and that's a really great thing. They still get to live their life. But in some ways, their lives are destroyed or torn down simply because they're questioning the tactics. I know very few people in the United States who actually say, you know what, Black lives don't matter. Or, you know what, we should discriminate against people.
Right.
No,
right.
Nobody's saying that. It's the people who aren't jumping on board with all the tactics and the methods of the movement. They are the ones who are being called racist. They're the ones who are getting axed, in a sense.
And it creates like the virtue or like a vicious cycle, like a downhill snowball effect, where just like in the French Revolution, like if you don't agree, then you're canceled. While the cancel culture keeps on chugging along, and no one can criticize it or try to put a stop to it, because if you do, then you're part of the, you're going to get guillotined, so to speak, and just snowball from there. Yeah.
Right, and so you see more and more chaos, more and more of a dissolving of the primary message for the sake of tearing down what's viewed as the enemy. And then what I think we're going to get from this is a softer version of what France ended up getting at the end of the French Revolution. So it was 10 years, in a sense, 10 years of bad. And at the end of the Reign of Terror and their attempts to mop it up, Napoleon came to the scene. And Napoleon was kind of seen as the savior because at least he brought some sort of stability, even though he became a military dictator. There is this great irony in that the French Revolution, the language of the French Revolution was for brotherhood and for democracy. And what it ended up was brother was turned against brother until finally they chose an absolute monarch to solve their issues.
Okay. Come full circle.
Right. And so I wonder if there's going to be some form of that ends up coming in the U.S. If chaos and all of this this violence and city burning continues in the name of justice and equality, at some point, people are going to turn to a leader that's going to squelch things, and not in a good way. The reality of the French Revolution is that the majority of people were against the Reign of Terror, and the majority of people were in favor of the religious leaders who ended up getting killed, to the point where religion was another thing that was kind of turned on in the French Revolution, to the point where the Notre Dame was turned into a temple of reason, and they saw religion as one of the problems. And yet the majority of people were religious, and the majority of people didn't want the reign of terror, but they were too scared to do anything.
Yeah.
But the majority will have their day. And what you don't want is that you make the majority angry enough that they end up being willing to support a leader who's going to end up creating a backlash that's just as bad. I think Douglas Murray talks about this in The Madness of Crowds, is if in the name of racial equality, for example, you end up being very racist in your anti-racism, what you might end up doing is poking the and then influencing a lot of people to actually be racist.
Yeah.
And actually see black people as a problem. Which right now most people don't see black people as a problem.
Right.
But when they're used in the rhetoric to then justify burning cities or canceling people, you would hate for the society to turn the other way. And so that's what I'm really concerned about.
Yeah.
Is not that these cities will continue to burn, but that we're going to get a backlash, which is going to take us back to the 1960s in a sense. Not completely to the 1960s, but there is going to be a racist backlash, which is going to look really bad.
Yeah, I hope not. And, when you're talking about the whole like French Revolution, like them coming full circle back to, wanting a monarch to kind of settle these disputes and kind of get things under control. And then even us today, if we're going down that path of like wanting a leader that's going to do all these things, it's kind of like, head up the quote unquote backlash movement. That kind of has echoes of the Book of Judges, where we're like, hey, give me a king, and I want a king, or a ruler of some sort that's going to, do the things that I want done. That has the power to do these things to my neighbor. Yeah. Man, it seems like there's these ideas that just keep recurring throughout history, and we've talked about it before on the podcast with Marxism, and then we've talked about Soviet Russia and the kulaks, and the killing fields of Cambodia and all this stuff. It just seems like the human condition is like prone to these really bad totalitarian, godless political movements. It's kind of depressing.
Right, it is. I think two kind of takeaways is one. I think we need to always be able to make a distinction between the message and the method. Okay. And often the method is actually going to reveal more about the spirit of the movement than the message. So the message of the French Revolution, equality. Who wants to be against equality? Brotherhood. Who wants to be against brotherhood? Right. Liberty. Who wants to be against liberty? But then the actual method of going about that was the opposite. Right. And I think the same thing we're seeing in the U.S. right now is that the message, who wants to say that they're a racist? Who wants to say, that they're a bigot?
Right.
So, I'm for equality. I'm for, Black Lives Mattering. I'm for, of course.
Right.
But let's look at the method that's happening. And often it's actually Black communities that are suffering because of the cities burning. And we need to look at the method. And we need to, if we are supportive of the message, we should not abuse people who are criticizing the method. And I've seen this all the time, even on my own social media feed. Somebody who questions the method is called a racist.
Yeah.
Or the if you're not for us, you're against us mentality.
Yeah. Man, that was good. I always like getting your insights. You're very you bring usually bring a really hard punch to these discussions. So I appreciate it. Everyone, like I said, we're gonna start doing these regularly, short episodes, just quick and to the point, current events, things that are just going on in pop culture. So yeah. So I hope you like it. Everyone, go like, subscribe to the podcast. Go visit the website. Got a new website. Check out our merchandise. But get plugged in. Email us, christincapital@gmail.com, and I'll plug Nathan's contacts in the show notes. So until next time, everybody, go love God, love neighbor, and build something. Talk to you later.